Make sure you check out our online store where we work with our graphic designer to create stunning garment and product designs that feature a wide variety of aircraft types such as British fighters, World War II aircraft, American bombers, Russian fighters and much more. You can pick your favourite designs and personalise any items within our Redbubble store that range from clothing right the way through to stationery. All of our designs feature our logo so you can show your support for the channel while getting a quality product. You can head to our website aircrewinterview.tv and click store, or go to redbubble.com/people/AC interview. Thank you and enjoy. Yeah, you mentioned there you were a test pilot, so the second half of our interview, this is going to be fascinating for me. You were let me get this right, were you the project demonstrator pilot on the X-29? Is that how you would class it?
There's a couple of things here in my history, if you will. As a Navy test pilot, when I was assigned to Patuxent River, I spent all my time either with the F-8 or the F-4. And I was fortunate enough to be in the carrier suitability branch. So our expertise was to take the various airplanes to the ship,
right,
and validate the performance and what have you. So it was the place to be, and I feel very, very fortunate to do that. And then when I left the Navy and got involved with the F-14 Tomcat with Grumman, I went to work for Grumman. It was during that phase of my career that I was asked if I wanted to take up the project pilot responsibilities on the X-29, which was a very easy question to answer.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about this project and what was the goal of this project for Grumman and maybe the Navy?
Well, it really just let me step back a little bit, and what generated the entire program for the airplane was that it has to do with aerodynamics and the fact that years ago, when they determined that it would allow for airplanes to make them go faster, there was a benefit to sweeping the wings. And why? Because it delays the drag rise as you approach the sound barrier. So, interesting enough, way back then, they recognized that if they're going to sweep the wing, the benefit was actually greater if you swept the wing forward rather than aft.
Wow.
So you say, well, how can that be? Because of all the aircraft designs you see that have aft swept wings. And the reason for that is a phenomenon called structural divergence. And so if you're building an airplane that's designed to be maneuverable, obviously a fighter would be in that category, that as you go to higher G loads on it, the aft swept wing will start to bend, and it bends leading edge up.
Okay.
And so when it does that, I don't want to get real deep in the aerodynamics, but the angle of attack is decreased, and the load on the wing is decreased. A forward swept wing, on the other hand, when you load it up, that when it twists, it will twist leading edge up. Hope I didn't get that wrong. I may have misspoke. You'd have to go back and look, but the aft swept wing will twist leading edge down. The forward swept wing will twist leading edge up.
Right.
And when it does that, it increases the angle of attack on the wing, and therefore the lift on the wing, and therefore the structural load on the wing, and very quickly, one follows the other, and the wing will fail.
Mm.
So the only way to get around that is to put enough structure in the wing to keep it from bending. And the other thing that airplane designers are always fighting is weight. And so the weight required to strengthen the wing to that point made the whole idea improbable. So basically what happened is a Air Force officer wrote a paper. He was going through a course, and he wrote a paper that he felt that with the advent of composite materials, that you could aeroelastically tailor the wing by the orientation of the plies in the composite wing so that as it loaded up, it would twist leading edge down.
Mm.
So this was a theory that he had. And he went, there's an agency called DARPA, which is a defense agency that really looks at potential advanced technologies and what have you, and got them interested in it. And the obvious truth was that if this was actually correct, that you wouldn't ever find a manufacturer that would put it in a new design that he wouldn't know whether whether it was correct or not until he had built his airplane, and you can imagine the money invested in it.
Oh yeah.
Harper said, "Well, the typically what they would do for new technologies is obviously they put them in a wind tunnel and what have you, but there are limitations of what the wind tunnel can do." So DARPA decided that they would fund a demonstrator program where they would build an actual airplane with a forward swept wing made out of composite material and tailored, and that it would be the proof of the pudding because it would be an actual airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So they put that out, and three major contractors bid on the contract, Grumman being one of them. And as it turns out, Grumman did a very wise thing, is they said, well, okay, we're going to build this airplane to test that technology, but why not use it as a technology demonstrator and incorporate other technologies that also could be proven at the same time. So on the X-29, obviously cost was another issue. And what Grumman did is, it's been described in joking terms that they went to the junkyard and looked for what was in the junkyard that they could use for this program. And so consequently was the birth of the X-29. And when you look at the airplane, they used a fuselage from an F-5. And I won't go through all the things. They used a landing gear from an F-16. They used an engine that was going to power the F-18. And so basically, they kept the costs down and they offered more usable data that would come out of the program. Mm-hmm. And so Grumman was awarded the contest. The program involved building 2 airplanes. And you say, well, why do you have to build 2 of them? Quite honestly, I think the major motivator was that there would be a certain amount of risk to the program. And so if you lost one airplane and it was the only airplane you had, all the money you spent, you got none of the answers and you spent your money. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, if we have 2, that if in fact we lost the first airplane, you'd have a second airplane to proceed with. Mm-hmm. So that was the whole issue. And we could step through all the technologies, but basically the forward swept wing was only one of them. And there were some others. Probably the most significant, even above the forward swept wing, was the instability of the airplane longitudinally. And so basically, what is a truth is that if you're building an airplane to maneuver, your enemy is stability. And why is that? Well, it's because to maneuver an airplane, you have to overcome the stability. Mm-hmm. Stability being a way to explain it would be that if the airplane is disturbed, well, if you're in flight and trimmed up and the airplane is disturbed by a wind gust or what have you, the airplane will return to its trim position. It has positive stability. If you don't have that, a pilot is actually capable of flying an unstable airplane, but only a certain amount of it. Because if you have neutral or negative stability, the pilot would have to spend all his time flying the airplane. Yeah. And then very quickly, you run into a situation where the instability is so dramatic that he can't stay ahead of it. Mm-hmm. So what did they do with the X-29? We had a fly-by-wire control system, which was relatively new at the time. And the primary goal of the fly-by-wire control system was to control the stability of the airplane. And so there's a lot of reasons why the airplane, well, let me rephrase it. The airplane was intentionally built to be longitudinally unstable. To give you an idea of what it was, what kind of boundaries it was testing, is a typical today's tactical airplanes, F-16, F-18, they have what is known as relaxed static stability. And I don't know the actual numbers, but I suspect they're somewhere about 2% unstable or neutrally stable, what have you. The X-29 was built to be 35% unstable. So what that guarantees, that if the flight control system didn't work, bad things were going to happen, and were going to happen very quickly. Mm-hmm. So the flight control system, the fly-by-wire, that initially the path they went down was a digital flight control system. But once again, dealing with the confidence in fly-by-wire, which is very common today, back then was that, well, we're not sure we can really totally make a digital control system foolproof. Basically, we had a whole separate computer system that was utilized. Its only mission in life was should the digital system malfunction. Mm-hmm. But the digital system, to show you how to control that level of instability, it updated the control inputs to provide artificial stability. It did it 40 times a second. So most fighter pilots would say, I could control an unstable airplane, I can stay ahead of the airplane, but I don't think there's a fighter pilot that's saying I could do it 40 times a second. Anyway, so that was the main challenge with the airplane, in addition to the forward swept wing. And there were several other technologies that I don't think we have time to go into all of them. Mm-hmm. But it was a unique airplane. I can summarize the whole thing that the philosophy of the forward swept wing and the benefits of it all turned out to be true. Mm-hmm. The other technologies certainly validated themselves. And so the logical question that people ask is that, well, if it was so great, why aren't more fighters have forward swept planes? And the obvious answer is because the military went to importance of low signatures, stealth technology. And when you build a stealthy airplane, what you want to do is avoid anything that would reflect the radar waves of a search radar. And with a forward swept wing, because of the interaction between the wing and the fuselage, you just can't do it.
So yeah, talk us through the cockpit. Was that basically just an F5 cockpit, or was it modified for the test environment?
You know, I never flew the F8, or excuse me, the F5, so I can't really answer that question. But there wasn't anything unique to the cockpit. That we didn't have any fancy displays or anything like that. So it was very functional. The whole airplane was a relatively small airplane, so it was a very comfortable cockpit.
So yeah, just like briefly talk us. It must be like obviously on a new kind of design or a test bed. The briefs and debriefs must have been quite long.
Well, it wasn't just the debriefs; it was preparing for a flight. So that's a whole long all the flights of the airplane were flown at the NASA facility at Edwards Air Force Base.
Right.
On site, they had a very accurate simulator. So that allowed us to pre-flight. In other words, once the objectives of any given flight were established and the test cards were written, we had the ability to go into the simulator and pre-fly the entire flight. And one of the challenges with the airplane is that we were somewhat fuel limited. So efficiency during the test profile was very important. And so you'd go there and you could fly the entire flight. And it was very useful because not only did you use it for the stepping through the cards, but you also used it for as far as headings that you would take to make sure you didn't run out of airspace before the test, that particular function was complete. Mm-hmm. So the other mandate of why it was all done at Edwards was the whole area has numerous dry lakes. And the X-29 being single engine, there was a concern that what happens if the engine quits? We actually had an APU that was taken out of the F-16. So loss of the engine didn't mean loss of the airplane, but obviously you had to land it immediately. And so the location or the availability of the dry lakes provided that. Fortunately, we used to fly, we on occasion would fly a profile just for proficiency reasons, but we never had to use it in hangar. The airplane behaved really well.
So how long what would be an average sortie or mission, and would you always have a chase plane with you?
Yes, NASA provided the chase, which would typically be a T-38. And there were portions of the test envelope that included supersonic flight, which we would use the afterburner there. And so those would be typically shorter flights. Mm-hmm. But the power that we had in basic engine was such that there would be, in fact, the majority of flights you would not use the afterburner. And the performance of the airplane, of course, was you'd have to wait on the T-38 because it was incredible.
So how many test pilots were on the program?
What started, actually, there were several agencies involved with it. DARPA was involved, but the management of it was really assigned to the Air Force. NASA was involved in that, obviously Grumman. So each one typically would have a pilot representative. So often we probably had, probably on an average basis, 4 or 5 pilots that would rotate through the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And they changed a little bit through the program, but there was really, everybody had their piece of the pie, if you will.
So, do you have maybe a memorable story that sticks out in your mind from a test flight on the X-29?
Well, all of them were memorable because you were looking at probably the one thing that people can relate to is that I already discussed how the instability is controlled by the flight control system. The primary muscle in the flight control system was a canard, which was, depending on the size of the airplane, was huge. It had the primary aerodynamic muscle, if you will. So you can actually see the canard from the cockpit. And so my first impression was that when I had a chance to fly the airplane, I would look out the window and see this canard just working its little butt off. It'd be I didn't expect it to be moving in a large amount, but certainly enough that you would see it oscillating back and forth. And the truth of the matter is, it looked solid as a rock, but you knew that it was updating 40 times every second.
So you mentioned the canard there, but what came from the X-29 project into fruition into frontline fighters or aircraft today?
Well, I'll address the flight control system. The description I was looking for earlier is the analog system. Flight controls at that point were digital computers and analog computers. They didn't trust digital computers, and so our backup was analog. And so since then, what the whole industry has evolved to is that fly-by-wire control systems are normally 4 channels, and they're all digital, and the reliability has improved. So concerns that we had with the X-29 really don't exist anymore. The flight control services that I think we demonstrated the functionality of high rate control surfaces, and all the modern airplanes have that now. So people, the obvious thing is why don't we see the forward swept wing? And I already said the major ingredient to that. The Chinese actually built an airplane that looks remarkably similar to the X-29. So that raises a lot of conjecture of how secure the whole data system was. But the airplane turned out to be, it set all sorts of records as far as reliability. What we would typically do, because of the length of each flight, that we would schedule 3, I think one time 4 flights in a row. So basically, whoever was flying the airplane, when they would land, they would go to the end to the whole short area of the runway, and would put power on the airplane so that the flight control system didn't shut down. and then we would switch pilots and refuel the airplane, and then they would go out and fly. And so the reliability of the airplane was demonstrated by, I don't recall ever losing flights because when it came back to turn around, something didn't work. So that's, for an X series airplane, that's really unusual.
Yeah, it sounds like you had an amazing career as a test pilot. But how long did you spend on the X-29 program?
Well, I was involved with the airplane long before it flew, and the downside of that, from a pilot standpoint, is because of the technologies involved and what have you, there was extensive simulation required. And they needed a pilot to fly the simulator, which is very, very useful and what have you, but it's not a favorite task of most pilots. But I spent hours and hours and hours. I lived on the West Coast, but I worked on the East Coast, and they were running double shifts because of time to hold to the schedule, what have you. So an awful lot of the preliminary work, which was simulator based and actually taxi tests and what have you, we did on the East Coast at the Grumman facility on Long Island. But when it came time to fly, we had to get the airplane out to Edwards. Mm-hmm. And we actually asked if we could fly the initial flights out of Long Island, out over our test range, out over the Atlantic Ocean. Mm-hmm. And the first question was asked, well, how many dry legs have you got? That was the end of the discussion.
But yeah, we've got a couple of questions from our patrons, Kurt, if you're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I'll try.
So this is from Alex, excuse me. As somebody who has tested automatic landing systems for the F4 and A7, are those systems still not mature enough, or those the US Navy stuck with manual landings because of institutional reasons?
Well, it's a great question, and that was another thing that it was either fortunate or unfortunate. My timing is it was called ACLS, Automatic Carrier Landing System. The developing platform was an F4, and so I was there and participated in what I'll call initial stages of it, and which involve land-based trials of multiple approaches where you would couple up the airplane, which means that the control of the airplane goes to the system, and the pilot is in a monitor mode. And when you're developing something like that, because of the avionics at the time, the reliability, the unknowns, and what have you, you would see the damnedest things during the approach that you were truly a monitor with your hand virtually. You didn't want to hold it on the stick because the stick moved as a function of the automatic control. But an interesting part of that, they used to bring visitors out to Patuxent, and they would bring the visitors out to the carrier suitability site, and where we were doing the approaches. And they would obviously brief them on, this airplane is not being controlled by the pilot. It's all being controlled by the automatic carrier landing system. So the airplane would come in and touch down or make a low approach, and around we go. Well, so then we got an input from the people in charge of these tours, and they said, we can tell everybody that it's automatically controlled, but there's no way for the observers to see that.
Mm.
So could you ask the pilots as they get close in where the observers can see them to please put their hands up on top of their head to show that they're not flying the airplane? Well,
Wow.
that would have given us an instant relationship to how the Japanese kamikaze pilots felt. we threatened to stuff the arms of a flight suit and bring them around and attach the gloves to the top of the helmet, obviously without our arms in it.
Yeah.
By the observers, but we weren't about to put our hands out there. You couldn't afford to do that. So back to the ACLS, we got to the point where it was incorporated into the air wings on the F4, the A7, what have you. The first problem, the first concern that was raised was if people do this on a regular basis, and assuming the system works perfectly, that what happens if something fails? And there were failure points all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly some guy who's used to essentially writing in during the approach and just observing what the system's doing, suddenly says, I'm not working, it's your airplane, right? Mm-hmm. So that was one of the issues. The reliability of it was. My personal feeling at that time is, and it's happened, is if the weather got to the point where you could not safely land on the carrier, and your choice was to either eject or trust the automatic carrier landing system, I would have taken the automatic carrier landing system. Mm-hmm. Now, fast forward to today, whole different ballgame. You've got fully fly-by-wire control systems, 4 channels, all digital, what have you. So the automatic capability is light years ahead of what we had. I think what is happening now is they've come up with a system where the pilot still flies the airplane, but they're using the inertial platforms, which is something we didn't have, and the displays, the head-up displays, which we didn't have, to give the pilot cues of what he needs to do to be on glide slope and on center line. And it's been very, very successful because it allows consistency for the approach. But it doesn't solve the problem of, okay, fine, if a guy gets used to flying the airplane that way, which is is different than the control inputs he would make if he were flying it. Mm-hmm. What do you do if it doesn't work? And the answer, of course, is, it's 4 channels, we have quad, whatever, it'll always be available. So they're using it in the fleet now and loving it, but it's not a fully automatic. In that system, you don't couple the airplane to the system. You actually respond pilot-wise to symbology that is generated by a system.
Great. Well, thanks for that question, Alex, and a great answer from Kurt there. And the last one here is from Jin Zhang. Can you describe any memorable DACT or BFM missions in the F8 against the F4?
Well, we used to have when I joined the squadron, our sister squadron, as I said, there are typically two fighter squadrons. Our sister squadron was an F4 squadron. And so there was never any shortage of targets when you were out in the area and what have you. It was not a very good test because the F4 squadron emphasized the radar-guided missiles, tracking people on radar, shooting them in the face at 3 or 4 miles, whatever, not really get into the dogfight thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the experiences in Vietnam were such that they didn't feel that, I'll speak from a Navy's perspective, that the results, air-to-air results from the fighter community were not as lopsided as they would like. And you essentially had two communities. You had the F-8 community and the F-4 community.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the genesis of Top Gun, which emphasized the strengths of the F-4
Mm-hmm.
and what have you, so that it made any engagement between an F-8 and an F-4 a lot fairer and not as slam dunk as it was in the early days when all the F-4s were oriented toward radar weapons deliveries.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's true of in the fighter community is you need to know what your platform is capable of, but just as important, you need to know what the adversary is capable of, and then how to exploit your strengths against their weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they do a good job of that now. I'm sure there would be a disagreement between Crusader guys and Phantom guys.
Always.
But I think if I were to give an honest answer, is it depends who's flying them.
Well, great questions there from our patrons, so thank you, Alex and Jim. But Kurt, yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful interview. We got some great detail there, especially about the X-29 project, which a lot of it I didn't know. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Okay, Mike. Well, enjoyed being with you.
Brilliant, thank you.